celebrity allure of entrepreneurship, many exceptional entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. Hey everyone, happy holidays. And I wanted to wish you a joyous new year. During this time, I wanted to actually release the last half of a conversation that I had with a good friend of mine, Keiron McCammon, who's been on the show before, very successful tech entrepreneur. But we actually talk about is how he endured a tragic accident in Colombia while he was paragliding, and it resulted in the loss of his arm. And he reviews a whole bunch of things that helped get him through this: acceptance, forgiveness, and letting go of the things that no longer serve you. It's an amazing story, very fascinating, and I encourage you to tune in, especially as you prime yourself to the things that you want to accomplish in the new year. Guys, have a wonderful holiday. Lots of love. Enjoy the show. And when did you have your accident?
That was 2006. So we just launched Caboodle. So we'd been developing it for a year. I just launched it, and I went on my trip to go paragliding in Colombia as a bit of a reward for a year of hard slog. And
yeah, do you want to share that story? Because, I mean, I think it's really interesting. The story is unbelievable, actually. But do you mind sharing the story?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd been paragliding for 12 years on and off, I think, at that point. Or loved to, it's a risk sport for sure, but just being able to fly free as a bird and, thermal up and float, fly into the clouds. It was, just an amazing passion. So it was probably outside of doing startups, I would be, any spare time, I'd be trying to go take my paraglider in my backpack and go fly somewhere.
So for those that don't know paragliding is the, big canopies where you're out on a hill or a mountainside and you try to catch a current and you basically jump off.
Yeah, you kind of run off the hill.
And you're holding it's like a triangle or a harness.
Yeah, harnessed into it. Yeah, so hang gliding is the rigid wing.
Okay.
That you would kind of, you almost lie flat underneath. Paragliding is the canopy, almost like a very elongated skydiving canopy in a way. So it's canvas, it's ripstop nylon up there with lines connected to your harness, and you're sat in it more just like a, seat, and you're flying. So it's a, I loved it when I was doing it. And you could, fly all around the world and literally take just a backpack that it packs up in. So I take it on trips, and, potentially if you've got good place, you can go either down at the coast or up in the mountains, you could go fly. I think my longest flight was probably 5 hours, probably about 100 kilometers nearly. I think it was in Brazil at the time. So it's amazing. Imagine just flying, circling and figuring out how you move from one rising air current to the next to travel, there's, tens of kilometers, hundreds of kilometers type of thing. So it was definitely a thrilling sport, but also a very demanding environment, very demanding skill, to be able to control the canopy. The air can be very turbulent. So I love the need to kind of master a very challenging skill in a very demanding environment. And that's why I love scuba diving. That's why I love snowboarding. It's kind of very similar dynamic. So, I just headed off for I think it was a 10-day trip with a buddy that I got connected to, fellow pilot, who was from Colombia, lived in the Bay Area, and he just started doing paragliding tours out of his hometown in Bucaramanga in Colombia, which is in the Colombian Andes, if I get it right, get the right mountain range. So we were there, and my wife had come with me. Kerry had come along. She wasn't flying, so she was just usually in the chase car. Long-suffering paragliding wife.
Right. That sounds like a lot of fun in the chase car.
Yes, that was definitely the last trip she was ever going to be going on, and as it turned out, it was the last trip she ever had to go on. But yeah, it was the penultimate day of the trip. And, I've been flying we'd done various different flights in different locations, and we were just driving down to a new location. So I was, flying in the direction of this new location, never flown this area before. The guy who had been flying been in the area a month or so, one of the fellow pilots on the trip, we were flying around and he bombed out, kind of landed. I couldn't really see where he was landing. So I said, I'll carry on. I'll fly a little bit further. I'll fly the furthest today. The old ego kind of kicks in a little bit. So I carried on flying.
So sorry, so he lands because he's lost his air current?
Yeah, I mean, it's the challenge of paragliding is, staying up. When you're flying, the glider's always descending. So you've got to find air currents, thermals that are rising as the air heats up that are rising faster than you descend. Mm-hmm. That's how you stay up. It's the same as a big glider with, you see them flying, sailplane flying in the air. So it was kind of fun, when that's part of the challenge of doing cross-country flying is, how do you figure out one thermal to the next before you hit the ground to find the next one to take you back up so you can then make it further along. So, we'd been bumbling around different areas, crossed each other a few times, and he'd flown off and ended up landing. I just couldn't see where he was. And
so are you doing this in the jungle of Colombia?
No, it's in the mountain range. So think of...
Because I'm thinking,
like,
you're flying over trees and you lose your air current, you're landing in the trees.
Yeah. Yep, pretty much. Done that. Been there, done that. You've done that? I ended up throwing my reserve parachute probably a couple of months before this trip. Should have been a bit of a red flag, I guess, in hindsight. But yeah, he just came over and got caught by the air coming over a hill, which gets very turbulent. My canopy collapsed and ended up throwing my reserve and landing down in the trees type of thing.
How high up in the air are you? 5,000, 2,000?
That particular one, a couple of thousand feet up at that point, yeah. But I think the highest I've been probably over 10,000. Because you're in altitude at that point already. So he'd landed, I flew on, and I don't remember a lot. I have moments of recall, as I was, leading up to the accident. I don't really recall everything that happened. I remember seeing not being able to see where my buddy had landed, deciding to fly on. I remember being kind of over the backside of the hill, literally nothing but green trees below me, getting low, and thinking, okay, this is a little dicey. The next thing I remember, I don't remember what happened in between, but then I managed to kind of get back towards the ridge, flying into the air, the direction of the wind. So I was, coming up over the ridge line and, low. So I was looking for somewhere to land. And I was just coming over this knoll of a hill, because I'd seen a little town. Again, this is in the middle of nowhere in the Andes, but there's a little town, village. So I thought what I thought was a field that I could land in. So I thought, okay, great. So I head that way. And then the next thing I remember as I came over this knoll of a hill was I saw power lines in front of me. And the sun was kind of coming down, so it was in my eyes. And power lines are, when you've got elevation there next to them, that's why planes or skydivers, it's the worst thing is you end up hitting power lines because you just cannot see them unless they're marked in some way. So, I saw it in front. So I'm a right-handed, so I buried my brake handle, my control handle, which puts you into a very steep turn. Potentially you can spin, but hey, that's better than, hitting the power line. What I didn't know, there was another set of power lines going down the right-hand side. So don't remember anything from that point forward until I woke up on the ground, but essentially piecing it together afterwards from kind of the photo evidence that we had. I'd hit those lines. I probably bodily collided, shorted across two of the lines. My glider wrapped in the line. Because I was going over the knoll of a hill, fortunately, the lines weren't that far above the ground. So I essentially woke up sitting in my harness, like sitting on a deck chair on a hillside, as a tourist or something. And my glider was wrapped in the power lines above me, literally wrapped around them. And I was just, sitting on the ground with my lines kind of going up toward the power lines. Obviously, I knew something had happened. I'd crashed, but I didn't know what. I don't remember being in pain, but I knew that, something had obviously happened. So as I tried to release myself, my left hand was just so firmly tight around the control handle that I had to kind of pry each finger open to get the control handle out so I could then get out of the harness and out of the canopy. Fortunately, some locals, I kind of vaguely, again, piecing it together, I kind of remember hearing some shouting before I had the accident, I think. But there was a couple of locals, I think, that had a truck that had seen me either coming in to fly, knew there were power lines. I don't know what the details were, but they came running up this hillside, just this red mud hillside, and were able to, get to me. I had my cell phone, and so not the smartphones of today, but, my cell phone on me. And so they were able to call my wife, Kerry, in the chase car, who were about 30 minutes away. They were obviously spoke Spanish. I didn't speak a word of Spanish, really. So I spoke to my wife and said, okay, I've had an accident. And she was like, oh, my God.
Oh, you were conscious enough to...
Yeah, I'd come to at that point. So I remember calling and then saying, hey, I'd had an accident. And it's kind of, she said, oh, my God, have you broken your legs? And I was like, oh, no, I'm fine. But, I had I knew, I just didn't know what the issue was. But I said, it's pretty serious. She immediately, because that's, not uncommon. The fall is usually the fall that you're going to damage an ankle or a leg or something. I said,
it's never the descent.
Yeah,
it's always
the ground.
It's the landing.
It's the landing that gets
not
you.
The fall.
So I then had her pass the phone to the guide that we were there with, my buddy, and I passed it to the locals because I had no idea where I was. It was Aratoka, I think, or something like that. But no idea because I've been flying cross country up in the air. So I passed my phone over and they were able to explain where we were. And ultimately what transpired, they took me in the back of their beaten up, classic kind of, rusted
Colombian
out.
truck. Two Colombians with cowboy hats
exactly.
And
who knows where I'm
rusted
going.
Out Ford F-150 from the 70s.
Yeah, pretty much. Like a Chevy truck or something like that. But, again, I don't remember a lot of this. So it's just little piecemeals that I remember. But they got me to the local clinic in the town that I was trying to land in. There was a medical clinic and, they took me in and started cutting all the clothes off and stuff. And obviously what had happened is I'd shorted across two lines and fried my arm and my leg badly, bad electrical burns. So all they could really do was just take it off and dress it. And at that point, my wife and the guy that we were with came in as well. The place must have stung. I mean, burnt flesh is not the most. I couldn't, again, no pain for me. Don't remember any smell or anything like that. I was just...
Which is amazing that you had no pain.
At least that I remember.
So early, you just said earlier you had to pry your left hand off the brake, which makes you turn. But was your hand not burnt or did you have a glove on or did you know at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I had gloves on, so I had no idea of what the damage was. I just knew that my hand was not working anymore. I didn't know that my leg, I don't know if I tried to get up and walk, but I remember I was kind of in between the two guys as they carried me down the hill. So I had no idea kind of what the damage was. But I knew that obviously something serious had transpired, shall we say. As far as I can recall, all the way through the clinic, don't remember... Again, no real sensation of pain, no real awareness necessarily of what was wrong other than they were cutting my clothes off and flight suit and everything else off. They couldn't do an awful lot for me. And it was, but they put me in the back of this ambulance, it's not an ambulance, it's like a hearse. They roll you in laying down on a stretcher.
A station wagon.
And poor Kerry had to sit.
It's like a Ghostbusters station.
Exactly. It was a Ghostbusters wagon pretty much. And Kerry had to sit in the back with me, and it was a 45-hour journey back to Bucaramanga across these twisty, windy country roads. It was hot. It must have stunk like high heaven in the back of the car. the back of the ambulance. So, again, I'm mostly out of it really. But poor Kerry, again, none of us really knew
she must have been out of her mind.
What was going on. But she had to basically endure being in the back of this car as we were weaving our way back to the main city and the main hospital. And that's where, we were able to finally go in and start to get like a sonogram thing where they could kind of show, they did. I remember laying in the stretcher and they brought this thing out into the hallway where I was laying, and they started to kind of do a sonogram of the arm to see what the blood flow was. And I'm like, praying that it's okay.
Is your arm bandaged up and stuff?
I don't remember. I still don't remember really seeing it. I can't remember I've got pictures of it because, for a period I definitely was not looking at it. Just didn't want to see what the damage was. But it was pretty burnt. You could see the veins were just black going down. It's like a skeletal hand, almost like you got a skeletal glove on type of thing. So, I was just looking at this thing, praying that, the blood flow, and it was just burned, but it wasn't too badly damaged. But we had, in the end, 3 surgeries in Colombia, where they took a vein graft from my leg to try and restore blood flow to the hand. Then that didn't really seem to work, so we thought maybe he'd put it in the wrong way around. So we took it back in and switched it around. And the facility was amazing, and they had a hand specialist there. So, it's not...
So this is not the image of a dilapidated hospital.
Like it was. Indeed, this is a Parker
top shelf.
Nothing like what you have in the US, but still a very good facility from that standpoint with a hand specialist. So very fortunate from that standpoint too. But obviously there was a limit to what they could do. And I remember, I think it was the 3rd surgery. He kind of, again, they didn't speak great English. So Kerry had this, dictionary that she was translating with, like Spanish English dictionary that she'd brought with her.
No Google
Translate. And, our buddy, if he was there, he was fluent, or he was Colombian, so that was fine, but he wasn't there all the time. But what they got another doctor, and he wrote on this piece of white, like a sheet of white paper, this kind of handwritten, that I gave them authorization to amputate my hand if necessary. And I had to sign that before I went in for my 3rd surgery, I think it was. And I was like, holy moly. I remember, I think it was lying on the stretcher outside for that surgery. And I remember saying to the surgeon, like, please save my hand. Something of I can't remember the exact words. But then as we were lying there, all the power goes out. It was the weekend. Then had one surgery open at the weekend. The power goes out. The backup generators kick in. So I'm just laying there going, oh
my God. Are you kidding me?
And then, then they put you under, and I don't, and then I came out of that, but, at that point, my wife had started to put into gears. I unfortunately had Dan medical insurance, which, they will repatriate you in case of an emergency. So we were able, I'd completely forgotten about it, I think, until after the 2nd surgery, but we decided to put the wheels in motion to get medevaced out of Colombia and back to the US when we ended up in Miami in Mercy Hospital. Took us 2 months to get back to the Bay Area by the time everything was done.
So let's go back to Colombia for a minute, because like you're going in for a 3rd surgery. They want you to sign on a napkin that it's okay for you to amputate the hand.
I wish I'd kept the note. It's like pidgin English.
Oh my gosh. So, put it in perspective, you're a computer programmer at this stage in your life, right? This is what you do for a living. So like, where is your head? Power goes out. You're like, what's your recollection of where were you in your mind? And Kerry too. I mean, I guess together, like it's just...
Yeah, probably it was harder on Kerry because I was pretty dosed, various stages dosed up on, morphine and
tequila.
Yeah, I wish. But, as the patient in it, I think it was definitely harder for Kerry having to watch it. two somewhat funny stories. So after the first surgery, they did the vein graft to try and restore blood flow to the hand, and they put plaster cast and everything around the arm. So that was the first. So went in that afternoon, first surgery, come the evening, and they put you into these automated medication machine. So you press a button, and it will put morphine into the drip. So depending on your pain level, you can self-medicate. It will only do so many shots an hour or whatever it was. So I'm there, and obviously the pain medication from the surgery is wearing off as the evening goes on. So I'm kind of pressing the button, kind of like, you can't really move around a lot in the bed. And, the thing would whir, and I was like, okay, I feel a little bit. And then it'd be like 5 minutes later, I'm like, God, this is pretty painful again. It's kind of, I'd try and move around to try and, just alleviate, if I moved a little bit, alleviate the pain. So I press the thing again. You only get so many presses an hour. But it whir, I get a little bit of relief, and I'm like, so basically all the way through the night. And then in the morning, Kerry came in. I guess I explained to her that, still in pain. So she was, nurse came in, she was reading from a mal, bad. That was the limit of our Spanish translation. Right. So I think she got a doctor, and they came in and they said, okay, and I managed to kind of somehow articulate that, was still in pain, even though I was pressing the button. So they looked at the machine, took out the little cartridge, they hadn't put it in properly. So they then put it in. So basically all through the night, I got a little bit of placebo relief for 5 minutes. And then I went through the entire, and again.
So you were getting any morphine, but you did get 5 minutes. That's interesting, actually. That's interesting.
The psychological relief of feeling like, that it was okay, should feel better, but it didn't last very long. So yeah, again, I don't remember, the brain, the mind's an amazing thing in that it dulls these painful memories,
But your level of uncertainty in that situation where you're like, they put the thing in wrong, power goes out, you're signing on a napkin about severing your hand off. Like your whole career, everything you've done, middle of a tech startup.
Yeah, I felt bad. I definitely felt bad for the fact that, this was definitely a selfish pursuit to go off and do such a risky sport whilst in the middle of doing a startup type of thing. So, there was definitely an element of, hey, I want to, so sorry to my Kerry had let my partners know what was going on. They were nothing but caring. But, obviously I felt an element of that. So that was probably more about as far ahead as I didn't think about, again, I still had my hand, so we never even thought about amputation at that point. We just very badly burned, and hopefully we can save the hand. So I wasn't thinking that far ahead.
But if you're signing on a napkin.
Yeah, it was the possibility that I could lose, I guess was there, but it wasn't something that I had even contemplated. I think that wasn't.
So you figured the probability is not that high.
That wasn't in my realm of experience to say, oh yeah, I'm probably going to lose my arm or lose my hand here. It was just a question of how the hell where do we go from here type of thing. So obviously they couldn't move me until I was medically stable. So they had to get the sign off from the doctors in Colombia to give approval to the Medivac to get us kind of out. So that whole process took about 5 days. So we were in Colombia, 3 surgeries, 5-6 days, I think, by the time we got Medivac'd out. I would say for me, it was kind of, reflecting back, this is not how I thought about it then, but reflecting back, obviously with hindsight, I think the first very, very early on, I had just accepted what had happened. Sure, there were lots of thoughts about why did I do that? What if there was a lot of, and I think Kerry had a harder time, and probably still does to some degree, hold on to some of this, which is the ability to blame others. It's like, it's not my fault. It's the guide my buddy that I'd met who was Colombian that had done the guiding. we turn up, and the week before he'd broken his foot flying, so he was the guy who was supposed to be leading me. He was there who I was to fly with. He should have been the guy that I was following, and if he landed, I would have landed with him, type of thing. So it's his fault. His partner, his wife, who was also a pilot, she'd had an injury. So, she's on crutches. He's got a cast thing around his leg, and we turn up. Kerry didn't want to come on this trip in the first place. She's much more intuitive energetically than I am. So she didn't have a good feeling about the trip. I mean, of course I didn't listen to her. I was determined to go do my own thing, shall we say. That was how
you're doing your sport, right?
That's who I was back then, for sure. So I think, there were a lot of possibility to kind of say, it's not my fault, it's someone else's. Why did this happen to me? All of that that cycle. And I think most people, all of us go through it, but I think I went through it very quickly. I was very fortunate. I think mindset-wise, I'd been exposed to Tony Robbins. When I moved to the US, kind of early 2000, came across this goofy guy, and I thought, what a load of nonsense. But I do credit and say, a lot of the CDs and stuff that I listened to gave me a mental framework that helped me get through this period. And a big part of it was I absolutely accepted what had happened and accepted and took responsibility that this was my fault. This was no one else's fault. At the end, as a pilot, they always tell you, and at the end, you decide to take off. How you land, that's not optional once you've taken off. Taking off is optional. Once you're off the ground, you've got, then you're committed. So at the end of the day, this has happened. There's no one else to blame. I'm just grateful that I'm still alive. At that point, given what I'd been, I basically shorted across power lines. When I explained that to one of the doctors, I think it was at the hospital, they're like, well, how did the electricity flow through your body from your left arm to your right leg and not stop your heart? That doesn't make any sense. So I kind of look at that, and I think, again, easy in hindsight, but even at the time, I just remember being fairly centered on, look, this has happened. There's no one to blame. Just accept what's happened.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do about it now.
Yeah, you can't go back. I can't rewind the clock. So it's just deal with the moment. I think I stayed very much, probably more so than any other time in my life, in the moment, which was here and now. Because if I look to the past, then I'm always, there's all the regret and the what ifs and the if onlys. If I went to your point, if I looked too far to the future, there was nothing but uncertainty. What the hell was life going to be like? Am I going to survive? I mean, this could have easily killed me. I would say if it wasn't for Kerry being there and being my advocate, it may well have. I may not have made it out of Colombia alive. But to survive that type of accident and wake up on the ground without a broken bone, a back, neck, or normally skydives hit power lines. It's not the power lines that kill him; it's the fall afterwards. I hit power lines, shorted across them, fell to the ground, and all I had was bad burns. All I had. So I think there was a lot of, you said earlier, the kind of gratitude in a way. Not that I processed it that way, but there was just a lot of acceptance, I would say, early on. For it's happened. There's nothing I can do now other than just move forward. I couldn't be an advocate for myself. I had to rely on Kerry to be that advocate. And thankfully she was a powerful advocate. But all I could do was just simply rely. For the first time in my life, I would say, since, you're a baby type of thing. And I learned this again when we were in Mercy, is like I essentially had to put my faith and rely on other people to look after me, because there was nothing I could do to save myself at that point.
But there's, I think, so a couple points there is, one, I think that there's you must build a lot of faith in humanity once you've gone through something like that and go, humanity's there and we help each other out. It's not there's a lot of downside to humanity, and, school shootings, but there is a lot of, faith and hope and grace, in humanity. But the other piece too, just reflecting on what you were saying, is this piece about, you had made a comment about not looking too far into the future, because it would create immense uncertainty. And it's, so many people struggle. They don't have to lose a hand it could be anything, could be any kind of trauma, could be a death in the family, could be a business in your business,
loss of a marriage,
kids, whatever. But, spending too much time in the past is just pain. The only thing that exists in the past is pain. There is, valuable reflection to learn lessons so you don't repeat them. But looking too far into the future can also, create a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, a lot of animosity, a lot of, so it's an interesting takeaway for people to just go, be careful of where you spend your emotional time and thinking time, because too much past, too much future can, not to say that you shouldn't be in there.
For me at that point in time, there was no, psychologically, I had to be very protective of my psychological state. Again, did it intuitively, can't say why necessarily, but I just knew that, I'm here now, and you just got to get through this. This too shall pass, I guess, is kind of that old phrase. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't serve me to go backwards and play the blame game or look too far forward. I think you can go, the future is really, when you're in an exciting place and you look to the future, and it draws you forward to a better future, a better outcome. I think, future pacing is an amazing thing. Mm-hmm. But there's also times of great uncertainty when, you don't know, that, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, obviously, in that environment. It's like going too far forward doesn't serve you at all. I couldn't imagine, it was no good for me to say, I'm going to be great. Don't worry. 3 months from now, I'll be fine. That wasn't going to help, type of thing, because your mental state will always go to the negative side, I suppose. So I just kept myself very much, it's not that I didn't think, there would be times then the mind would wander, but I would always come back to just the here and now.
Were there some conscious strategies in that? Like being, I would say, on guard of your state?
That's how I can best describe it in hindsight. I think foundationally, I'd had a lot of mental strategies just from reading and listening to Tony's work. So I think that was foundational, and that just became intuitive for me in the moment, because I don't remember thinking in the moment what I was doing. I can only reflect on it later and say, okay, how did I get through that? Well, that's interesting. Now I can introspect and look at it and kind of say, well, in that moment, I just accepted that this accident was caused by me. It wasn't an act of God. It wasn't, it was just bad luck. No one else to blame. I'm here now. I'm thankful for being alive. And now I've just got to get through this. And that's kind of what I remember kind of, constantly processing in a way.
Right. And so in the moments, because, that's on a macro level, you're like reflecting back going, but in the moment, are you, is there a question that you asked to keep yourself from bumpering outside of the present?
I just stayed. You stayed. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was conscious of my limits very much. I mean, fast forward a little bit to time in Miami, certainly post amputation, even pre-amputation, I would not, when they were debriding my hand and everything, I would not look, because I knew I was not ready, somehow intuitively knew I was not ready to see quite what damage I had done. I'd saw it in Miami.
So you still hadn't seen it?
I'd kind of seen it rather in Colombia initially, but now they were literally debriding and taking all the dead skin and tissue away.
Okay, so let's go to Miami.
So
So you
it's-
fly it. You fly. Oh my god. You fly it. I'm a sick guy. I'd probably look like I'd be like I'd have to see how they do this, but I can.
It was a while before I could look.
Yeah. So you leave Colombia,
Yes.
arm intact, go to Miami, land, and you're at Mercy Hospital.
Mercy Hospital in Miami. Then did an amazing job medevacing us out from this plateau in Colombia, or my first private jet ride, or first ride on a private jet. Awesome. Don't remember much of it. I had too much morphine in the system.
If you can't afford it at the
Exactly.
jump into some hydrolines.
So yeah, we arrived in Miami. Obviously, then it was kind of funny. Obviously, part of all I'd heard around me for 5 days is just Spanish. Constant Spanish. Again, I didn't understand Spanish, unfortunately. Arrive in Miami thinking, thank heavens, we're back in America. Okay, not in the Bay Area, but we're back in the US. Awesome. Be able to, understand what people are saying.
Yeah, communicate. I mean, that's got to give you a lot of level of certainty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So we get into the ambulance and they're speaking Spanish. It's Miami. So it's like, really? But, we get, obviously they took us to the hospital and then we got introduced to, and again, I count all the fortuitous circumstances, which was, one, I survived. 2, I ended up in actually a pretty good hospital in Colombia. There was a hand specialist there that was working on me who happened to have gone to a conference in the US and met one of the top hand specialists who happened to be and work at a Mercy hospital, who connected in and had already talked to this guy and got him to take me as a patient, even though he wasn't taking patients, as a hand specialist in the US, because he'd met this guy at the conference. And
that's a lot of grace at play right there.
So I look at that and just say, all of those incredible. So this guy, him was my hand surgeon. He then brought in this other top plastic surgeon. Didn't need him originally, but basically I a lot of skin grafts and stuff in various places down the line. But basically both of them were working on me. Literally came in. I think we spent the next 3 or 4 days in ICU. Kerry was sleeping on a cot in the ICU. Again, God bless her. They were basically debris coming in and debriding. So basically in the ICU would come in. I would not look. They had a little curtain.
Can you explain what that is? I don't know what it is. Debriding, I'm assuming it's
basically,
the skin?
Yeah, taking scalpels and cutting away all the dead skin. Because basically it's electrical burn. So they don't know what's going to survive. You don't want to leave dead skin because then it can go to necrosis, which can then lead to gangrene or basically poison the blood, and then you die. So, they're basically every day coming in and just cutting away my leg and my arm, what doesn't seem to be alive anymore. So it was surgeries every day, debridements every day. Then they put me in hyperbaric treatment twice a day, which is oxygen therapy under pressure in the compression chambers, which is great for wound care. So, I was going through this pretty rapid pace of, twice a day, taking all my wound coverings off, put me in the oxygen therapy, debridements every day, going back in, then going into surgeries as they were doing more deeper debridement. So it was a pretty, it was a tough toll for that first 2-3 weeks, I think, in Miami, as they were just trying to figure out, is the hand, will it, can they keep it, can they, will it recover type of thing. And at that point, Kerry had to find somewhere, like a long stay place that she could book into. And this is where, again, Colombia was amazing. But when I look at the duty of care of the people in the hyperbaric chamber, the doctors, we're still in touch with some, one of the doctors, he passed away recently, unfortunately, but we stayed in touch with some of the people that were giving us the care. And I just look at it and just say, I get they're nurses and doctors. I get they have a duty of care, but they went above and beyond to look after myself, Kerry. They would drive Kerry backwards and forwards occasionally. This guy would, the top hands would come in, end of his shift, like 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, come in and check, maybe do something with me, and then offer to take Kerry home. Wow. And I just, they didn't know us from Adam. the care that they showed both, I'm more grateful that the care they showed for Kerry as much as, the care they showed for, we got pictures of them. And it's just, even now, I mean, it's just, I reflect back now and, it's just, I'd never experienced that. I was a pretty selfishly driven, motivated person, did what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. That was my self-drive, and drove a lot of my success in life. And that was a wake-up call to see people that they were just wired differently to me.
Yeah, wow, that almost brings tears to my eyes. Like that's humanity, right? That's the good side of humanity.
That's the good side.
That is the beauty that we often don't hear about.
Yeah. And we were there for nearly 2 months in Mercy. So we got to know these folks pretty well, and had good rapport and chat. But they were very much part of the support system. We didn't have anyone around us. All of our friends were in Bay Area. A couple of them flew in. My family was in Europe. My mum came in. My brother came in. But mostly it was just Kerry and I in a place we'd never been to before, really. So they were part of the support system. She was my support system. They were the support system for her.
Shout out to Mercy Hospital.
Yeah, and the staff there, absolutely incredible. And it was, I think it was probably after about 8 surgeries. I don't know how many debridements, but 8 main surgeries where they were basically saying, we think you should amputate. We don't know quite how this hand is still alive. Kerry's, she's a massage therapist or has trained as massage therapy, does a lot of energy work. She called someone in to come and do energy healing on me. She'd got me these homeopathic treatments. So she was doing everything to try and save my hand at that point, obviously. But it got to the point where, the surgeons, the prognosis was not looking good, shall we say. And I remember them, my hand was just, could look at it kind of a little bit at that point. It was just blackened, basically, just raw, like just so burned.
Like any muscle on it or anything? Just looked.
Yeah, it was still, the hand was there at that point, but it was just fried. Just red, raw. They obviously debrided and cut away stuff, and the hand was just like, was just rigid. I had no control, obviously, of it. And they was like, we don't know. There's no detectable blood flow to the hand, yet the hand is still kind of alive. They didn't quite know why. Basically, to prove the point, put a needle in the vein of the hand. There was no blood flow.
No blood flow. No pain.
I can, it was to demonstrate to Kerry kind of thing more than anything that, hey, So the choice was ours. Do we continue to fight to save my hand, or do I choose to amputate? And we got to chew on that one for a few days before they wanted to schedule the surgery. And it's one of those kind of hardest decision in the world, that when you get clear about what's important, becomes actually a really easy decision at that point. And again, right or wrong, what I was, I just want to get back to life. I want to get back. There's surgeries every other day, hyperactive twice a day, 5 days a week. It was just taking a toll physically, mentally. I just thought, I can't keep doing this. I want to get back to life. I want to get back to the Bay Area. I want to get back to my startup. If I continue to keep the hand with an indeterminate prognosis of what would it even be functional? It would just be this, this balled up hand that had no use type of thing. I could be in hospital for 9 months as they try to work and save it and see what's, by the time you get through all of that, I could die in the process. There's nothing, if I get an infection or the hand starts to, truly is necrotic, then, obviously that blood poisoning. So, all of that you have to kind of weigh up. But at the end, it was a simple decision for me, which is, what's the quickest way to get back to life? I want to get out of hospital. I don't think I can keep going with these surgeries. And again, I didn't realize, it's like anything in life, if I'd have known then what I know now. But I just thought, okay, one more surgery, we amputate, I'm done, I can start healing, we can get, I don't want to spend 9 months in hospital. So, I made for me, I'd made the decision of, okay, the quickest way to get back to life is for the amputation. Didn't know what would come, had no frame of reference to know what it would be like as an amputee, but it just seemed better than, the path we were on, should we say, of just surgery after surgery after surgery. So, talked it through with Kerry and kind of said, I think, amputation seems to be the best. She was still fighting to save the hand. And then and she doesn't really remember this. I remember it pretty vividly, so I don't think I was hallucinating. But I remember we were laying outside the surgery to go in for the amputation. And she was there, waiting with me, holding my hand. And she kind of looked at me and said, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Because there's no going back. And even like internally, I was like, no shit, Sherlock. Yeah. But, what came to me was, it's okay, we have to let it go. And that idea of letting go of something that no longer served me was it's been an anchor, it's just been something I always come back to, through that experience. Was I didn't lose my hand, I let go of something that was no longer going to serve me. And, as I look back and frame up kind of what I went through, there were really three stages that I think helped me get through everything. Was accept what has happened and take responsibility for it. Don't blame anyone. Don't even blame yourself, type of thing, but just accept what has happened. Forgive yourself and all those around you. And those were the two things that kind of happened in Colombia, and as we're going in Mercy. And, how could you not when you're surrounded by such love and care? And then the third one is, letting go of something that no longer served me. So it's, those three things, through business, through life, now are always my anchor of accept, forgive, let go.
That's a very profound perspective. Especially the last one, because we've talked about the other two, but letting go of something which seems so trivial, but the way you phrase it, the way maybe you framed it in your mind of it no longer serves you. I don't think a lot of people get to that stage. They let go of stuff, but they don't let go of it.
Exactly.
Let it sit in their mind still, and it may not come back as often. They may not live on it every single day, but it still circulates back. And, I had a friend of mine on the podcast who had lost the use of his legs, and every year he has a party called the Smashiversary. He got in an accident on his motorcycle, and so but he celebrates because he's still alive. Not every year when that anniversary comes back, it's a shitty day because you have regret or you have anger or blame or whatever. Yeah, and so but that distinction of letting go of something that no longer serves you is super powerful.
And I've used that 3-step process in a way, in business context, in life, in other areas of life. But it really, that was the most powerful embodiment of it for me, of just accept, forgive, let go, and then you can move on. If you don't, and it's in that order, and he said most people, and this is a big theme for me, I think early in my recovery, once I did get finally back to the Bay Area and out of hospitals, was the idea of not just surviving, but thriving through the adversity that I'd faced. And I think most people get stuck in, I've survived, I'm a survivor. And it's like, that's amazing. Like, we're all surviving. If you're still alive, we've all survived. Right. We've all survived something in life. Mine's very visible, other people's it's psychological, whatever it may be. So it's like, it's not just about surviving, it's about being able to move on and thrive and take what's happened to you as an experience and really turn it into something beautiful. And I think you can't do that if you're still holding on, or you're still blaming, or you haven't fully accepted what's happened. So that's why I say, it's as I go through, whether it's a failure of a startup, it's like accept, forgive, and let go. And sometimes though, sometimes they're harder, one step's harder than some of the others. But if you can go through that process, and for some people it's psychological, it's letting go of an emotion, or It's letting go of a relationship, intimate or otherwise, that no longer serves you, and just recognizing that, hey, as I said, it's the easiest decision in the world when you get clear of what's important.
What's important. And that's an important piece. Rather than getting hung up on the small details, going, okay, what's really important in life, and get clarity on that and then move forward from it.
And I think, I've learned so much from, then getting connected with other amputees, traumatic or otherwise, and others with disabilities. And so contrast is an amazing thing. I look at, okay, I lost my hand. People look at me who are fully able-bodied, should we say, and they can say, oh, look at this guy, and I, took up doing triathlons and doing races a few years after my accident, endurance sports, on the basis that people would look at me and kind of say, well, if this guy can do it with only one arm, what excuse do I have? I should get out there and do that. But then, I got connected with people with no arms, no arms and no legs, with 4 prosthetics, 2 prosthetic arms, 2 prosthetic, and looking and going, holy shit, and this guy's up walking around, and he's got, and you just think, contrast, and
yeah. You think you got it bad. It's pretty easy to find others that have gone through much worse.
Yeah, and you look at this guy, and he's the happiest guy around. It's like, he was born that way type of thing, so he knew no different. And it's just like, that's absolutely incredible. So I've been blessed to get connected in communities of people, like people who, similar situations, and you just take inspiration from. And in a small way, I try and, provide a bit of inspiration for others through the things I do, which is, hey, I'll do, I still do I don't fly anymore, but, I still do the things that, the adventure sports I love to do, snowboarding, scuba diving, triathlons, Ironman distance, up to Ironman distance triathlons. And now I get to do all those things with a slightly different perspective, which is, hey, if I'm doing this, what excuse have you got, type of thing. And I don't need to know who I don't do it because I want to, someone to come and say, hey, you inspired me. I mean, sure, people do at times, and that's awesome. But it's just knowing that, just being out there and doing what I do and be the change you want to see in the world, as they say. Hopefully it'll inspire someone else, and, they make a change in their life. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you did the Ironman in Hawaii, right? In Kona? Yeah. Yeah. What are the distances again on that?
2.4 miles swim to start with in the ocean.
And you don't use any prosthetic for your swim?
No, not allowed to, yeah. I don't allow you to use anything in the swim. 2.4 miles, one arm. That's a long way. Wait till you get out to the 1.2.
I can't get 60 feet in the pool.
You get 1.2 miles out to the turnaround, and you think that's a long way to get back. Yeah. So, that's a discipline of being in the moment. Because if you get too focused on where you are in the swim or how much further you've got to go, that's a mind game. That's a great discipline of just keep stroking.
I would have nenever thought of that. That's interesting.
You just got to keep counting the strokes and just keep going until you get to the end of that. And then you got a 12 mile bike through lava fields up the side of a volcano. And then you think you're going to come downhill, and then you realize that actually you're just coming down into the wind. So you've got 112 miles of slog on the bike. I think the temperature hit over 100 when we were doing it last year. And then you get off of the bike and you do a full marathon, 26.2 miles, various roads up and down, more hills than I believed there was when we drove the course. It didn't look like there were hills there, but when you're running, those small little rises end up being pretty big hills.
Well, especially after 112 miles of biking.
Yeah, it was a long. That was a tough. I don't do as well in the heat, and that was a hot, humid day. So it sucks it out of you. But did it? Crossed the finish line.
Finished it. Do you run it the whole way, or can you? At the end of all that activity, can you actually?
I can't.
You don't have the stamina to make the full run.
I think I managed 12 miles to keep kind of a run jog, a walk run pace. But this hill just kept on going, and I just like, I just saw this snake of runners just going up. It's kind of this, you're running on the freeway at that point, and you're Queen K, and you're just a snake of people going up and then down, and then you see them go up. And I just think, I'm walking. So I managed to run the last mile.
Did you? Dude, you completed it. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's crazy to me that you can do that swim, with one arm, keep your balance in it. I mean, sure, obviously you train for it. And the bike, so you must have
Yeah, I can wear a prosthetic on the bike that just allows me to I'm not as stable, so it's definitely challenging in the wind there, but I kind of sit in my aero bars with my little prosthetic hooked over the bar, so it gives me some stability, and then just pedal away. But yeah, I lost a lot of muscle tissue on my right leg, and they took a big muscle and skin graft from my left leg to put around my arm. So, my only one good arm used to be this arm until I broke the collarbone snowboarding. So yeah, now I don't have any good limbs really.
Oh my God. Dude, it's unbelievable. Your courageousness is it's overwhelming. Your pursuit and actually I wanted to ask you, so you come home, you obviously you're a computer programmer. You're on a keyboard all day long. And then how mentally did you reinvent yourself to get through that piece of it?
I don't recall any friction there. Started going back into the office 3 months after the accident. I'm still going through recovery. Couldn't go in, couldn't do a full day's work, but could go in 2-3 days. Kerry would drive me just because then I could socialize and be around, my arms in a sling and all bandaged up. But I was never the fastest typist in the world. I would be, one finger, 2 fingers on each hand type thing, pecking at the keyboard. So now I'm just 4 fingers on one hand. I'm about the same, speed. So it really didn't change.
2 fingers on 2 hands, you're 4 fingers on one.
I'm just more dexterous with the one hand now. No, it didn't really. And, with programming, you spend more time thinking than you do typing. When I started writing and, still got half a memoir written and probably about 30,000+ words or whatever. So typing a book, on the other hand, is all, either handwriting, which is mostly what I do, and then transcribing. So that's when you're really speed of typing. I'd probably appreciate a second hand if I still had it, but then I wouldn't be writing a book about losing a hand. So.
Right. Good point. Very good point. So the 3 pieces there: accept, forgive, let go. Which one was the hardest? Which one do you struggle with most today?
I think from my accident, I think I'm clean.
I just mean in life.
In life?
You said it's your formula kind of that you use consistently. And I think it's a great formula, by the way. But not everything's easy.
Yeah. No, sometimes, it varies. I think forgiveness can sometimes come hard, whether that's of yourself or others. So in the business context, forgiving the people I'd worked with and being able to just, so it's probably ultimately, I think it probably all comes down to letting go, because, that's where you get clean, I think. But sometimes you can't let go until you can really, particularly if it's an emotional, a relationship thing, not necessarily intimate, but just, a relationship breakdown, is kind of just being able to forgive and love that other person for who they are and who they were, so that then, that gives you the ability to let go. Otherwise, you're just kind of, oh yeah, I've let go of that. Yeah, I know, it's good. I'm over that. You're still tired about it. So, that sometimes, usually I find acceptance of, I'm pretty pragmatic. Hey, no, there's no going back. This has happened. Okay, let's move forward. So I don't get too hung up on the what ifs of the past. Fortunately, it's just the way my mind is wired. But forgiveness can be a challenge at times. And then letting go, sometimes it's taken me, years to be able to truly feel, to not have energy around that situation or that relationship or whatever it was, and just be able to wish the best for that person and to be able to truly just kind of feel, I've let that go. So it's taken, I think some people, it takes a lifetime and they don't get it. There's probably some things that I'm still, probably won't be a lifetime and still won't get. So I think probably letting go is the hardest to get to, because it's the culmination of everything that you've got to have done to get there. So yeah, let go. That can be a tough one.
Yeah, I found for me it was forgiveness, but mostly forgiveness to myself. That was probably the big one that, had made a massive change for me in being able to move on, or and not just move on like in one instance, but in, to make a massive leap in my life, in my own growth, which then ultimately affects, especially all your intimate relationships. But that for me was the forgiveness of myself, was kind of the biggest one. But
it's the one I think a lot of people miss out on. Is like, how can you, truly love someone else unconditionally if you can't love yourself unconditionally? Or how can you truly forgive someone else if you can't forgive yourself first? And it is sometimes the hardest one that we get hung up on.
It's 100% true. I mean, it's I've seen the example where, somebody puts like a $5 bill or something in their hand, or anything, this Kleenex, and you put a Kleenex in your hand. But if I'm gripping onto it, you're gripping onto what you're holding on to inside. I can neither give nor receive to someone, or in my intimate sphere, or in any situation, in business, whatever. So, I guess that goes to your letting go, but for me, I had to forgive myself for all the shit that I judged myself on.
We are judging machines as human beings, I'm afraid.
Listen, we're almost into 2 hours. How do people find you online? I mean, your story is freaking fascinating, man. I mean, I love you. It's like I've known you for years, and you're one of my best friends. But every time I hear the story, I'm just like, wow, it's crazy.
Thank you. Likewise. And onehandedblogger.com is I started that. It's kind of a little funny aside, but before I had my accident, obviously tech scene in the Bay Area, blogs were this big thing. People were creating blogs, it was all new. And I was like, I'd love to create a blog. I just don't have anything to write about. That was about 2 weeks before my accident. So
really? Oh, well, I guess be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. That was a silly one. So I started a blog. So it's got back in 2006, it was kind of reflections on the accident and my recovery. And now it's more about the sports and races that I do. So I don't post super frequently at the moment, but it's got kind of my race recap from the Kona Ironman. So, but yeah, that's probably if you want to find me, or, subscribe to my little updates that I send out every now and then. They can find me there. Otherwise, LinkedIn.
Nice. Is there anything we missed? Anything?
I'll tell you one funny aside that was in the back of my mind to mention. So hopefully Kerry won't mind. I didn't find this out until years later. Actually, when I was partway through writing my memoir, I was talking to Kerry about some of the, because her experience of is very different from mine. Her perspective and what she remembers versus what I remember. I said she remembers stuff I don't remember.
It's probably almost like two completely different.
It's like that Sideways or whatever. The movie where the train doors and two different life journeys. She has a very different, remembers very different parts of the experience we went through. But we were talking, and I was talking about writing bits of the book and using her to help me kind of remember things, as well as looking at my blog posts. And she told me, and this was probably 2003, 23, probably 5 years ago now. And she'd never told me this. But when we were in Colombia, the day of my accident, so a couple of things happened. Normally, before I took off every day, we would exchange a kiss. I'd give her a kiss and then I'd go off and fly. And then she'd be in the chase car and following around. Well, that particular day, camera got dirty or something. She'd gone back to the car to get a cloth, and then I took off without giving a kiss. So I remember distinctly thinking, well, hope I don't go and kill myself, because, obviously I didn't say goodbye. So, I was like, oops.
Oh, wow.
And then, of course, the accident hits. But what I didn't know is that morning at breakfast, Kerry told me, again, 5 years ago, so a long time after the accident, that she'd had enough at that point and had decided that, after this trip, when we got back, she was going to ask for a separation and was planning on leaving me. Can't blame her, I have to say, given, what the way I lived my life at that point, I guess, and the way, we were together. But yeah, she decided she'd had enough. And, then at that point, had my accident, and I guess there was no escape for her.
She's probably sitting in Columbia Hospital going, for fuck's sakes, I thought I was out. It's
so close.
It's like being in the mob. They keep dragging me back in.
And, again, we're better. We are obviously still together now, and, the better for it, I would say. If it wasn't for the accident, I think I'd be pretty bet that we would not be together as a couple. And she also told me, which I never knew about either, in Mercy, when we got there, I don't know who of the staff, but some of the doctors or the staff were talking to her and saying, look, we understand if you want to leave and leave your husband, it happens. Some people just can't, they can't take this. And again, she didn't tell me any of this until, way, way, way after the accident, obviously, in more recent times. So, she went through her journey for sure.
Yeah, well, obviously it says a lot about her character for who she is, to stick by you and care for you and get you through that, when probably some of the time she just wanted to kick you in the side of the head.
As I said, I promised her in from my hospital bed that I would never fly again, and I've definitely upheld that promise. So, yeah, it was good reflection.
How did it change you then? Like, what do you think has then, what's been the result that do you think has saved the marriage? Because obviously, that was a long time ago. It was, what are we, 15? It was 15? No.
2000,
17 years ago?
Yeah.
So, you've stayed together a long time since. So obviously it wasn't the accident that kept her there for 17 years. What do you think have been the distinctions that I'd have to have a conversation with her. But, but from your perspective and how you've changed inside this whole experience and evolved.
So, after the accident, you say, hey, nothing's changed and everything's changed. It was kind of that paradox. If I was still the same person, I was absolutely, still driven and, got back to do my startup and doing the, the career and startup stuff and being, striving for success. But at the same time, everything had changed. Clearly I lost a hand and, getting on with a very different life. I would say that was the catalyst for the beginning of a journey. I wish I could say I was enlightened enough that, some people, want to hear the story, which isn't true for me, of I woke up on the ground and I found God and I was enlightened and realized the error of my ways. I was still pretty conceited, I think, pretty selfish going into the accident. I think the accident was a beginning of an introspection to realize that, my actions can have a lot of repercussions for other people. In this case, Kerry, my mum, my family, my immediate friends, my business partners, my desire to go and pursue what I saw as, hey, I do whatever I want to do. It's like, yeah, you can go through life with that perception and that drive, but I was blind to the cost, the toll that it was taking on my intimate relationship and my relationship with others. And that was definitely a kind of, a wake-up call. I very much believe, I'm not particularly religious by any means, but I do kind of believe in, there does seem to be a higher power of something going on, of, the universe, is giving you some lessons. And if you don't get them, it's just going to knock a bit harder. I think I had a few wake-up calls along the way, including, throwing my reserve parachute, and that, like, there was some little knocks from the universe
Taps
saying,
on the shoulder.
Hey, you might want to...
Hey, dummy.
So I say, if you don't get it, it's just, the knocks just get harder. Fortunately, I survived this one, but that was the beginning until you kind of see, okay, yes, I can absolutely pursue the things I want to do, but I have to be cognizant of the toll and the cost that it's taking on others. And I have to decide, is that pursuit worth it? Versus just saying, this is what I want to do. And so, and again, I wasn't a bad person. I don't think, if you talk to Kerry, it's not I was a terrible person. We had a terrible relationship. It's just I was very selfish with my own time. I did what I wanted to do, in that case, pursuing paragliding. Coming out of that, I was a lot more aware, starting of awareness of, okay, it's not just me here. There's not just me in this relationship.
It's like the deleveraging of the ego. It's the beginning of it. Where that's the tops on the shoulder, where maybe just hey, you pulled your parachute there, dumb nuts. Like,
it's, that gets us into trouble. And again, I got a few gentle taps, and then it took the big one, a big hit to kind of give me the wake-up call. But I would say it still took us a lot of time. I mean, that was after we'd been together a good while, a decade or so at that point. So there was a lot of challenge, of past experiences that we had to overcome with each other. And that's, the second half of the memoir, if you like, that I have yet to write, is kind of that part of the journey in a way, which is, look, the accident, I did not wake up an enlightened individual who'd seen the errors of my way, but it was a kick up the backside that kind of got me on a path of self-reflection and introspection, and very much interested in personal growth. And we went to our first UPW, Unleash the Power Within, that Tony Robbins runs, even though I'd seen him, I'd listened to him a lot, never been to a live event. So both Kerry and I in June, so the accident was in February, went to a UPW, and part of the UPW is a fire walk. So here's me kind of arm bandaged up, nth degree burns, doing a fire walk, so you could say maybe I didn't change that much, but
I didn't think you didn't burn one of your feet off.
So, oh, damn. But I then went on a journey, I think, of self-development on self. I had to focus on myself first. That was the realization. So I got very much immersed into that, and that's obviously where we connected through that world in 2009, as we were continuing on that journey. And the two of us have, we've had some close calls, but I think probably what keeps us together is we've both given up on each other at different times, but we've never both given up on each other at the same time. And so there's always one that's pulled the other back into the relationship. Until we could get to the point where I think we finally, through a whole bunch of different other circumstances, nothing to do with my accident necessarily, but again, that was a catalyst of just, I found myself, Kerry found herself, and only when we found ourselves could we come back to and find each other in an intimate relationship. And that, was almost catalyzed nearly a decade after my accident. So, we had to hang in there and fight for each other at different times as we went through that journey before we've truly, I think, found who we are together now and the relationship we now have, based on, a lot of life experiences. And, Kerry went through some challenges, health challenges as well through that time. So, I wish I was smarter and I could say, just took an accident and everything was right again. And, it makes a great story, but it's not reality, I don't think. It's like the startups, you come back to the business side, say, hey, that was an overnight success. Yeah, 10 years in the making. It's like, where we are now in our relationship, hey, that's amazing. Yeah, you should have seen the previous 20 years.
It's not the movie fairy tale story of, hey.
You want to see the sausage or the making of the sausage?
Right, exactly. Dude, there's probably a whole nother conversation there of unwinding the ego, actually, of, that whole process of what you went through. And I think we have content for another conversation. We're 2 hours in, and I mean, this has been amazing. I think for anybody listening out there, it's there's a lot to draw on from your life story or what we talked about today. There's more story to come, and I'd love to have you back on the podcast if you'd come. But I think there's more. There's a lot of things deep in what we spoke about that people can extrapolate for their life, for their intimate life, for their business life. There's and encourage anybody listening that if they ever wanted to reach out and learn more about startups or whatever from Keiron, he's a wealth of information. But love to have you back. This has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Been fun.
I'm looking forward to catching a drink here after with you. So,
sounds good.
Anyways, thanks for coming. Awesome, guys. Reach out, look Keiron up online, and love having you here.
Yeah,
appreciate the conversation, man.
It's been fun. Let's do it again.
All right. Thanks. Sounds good.